When Navy ships visit a foreign port, it's traditional for them to be welcomed by local dignitaries. And when the Argentine Navy's new training ship, Presidente Sarmiento, began a tour of Spanish ports in 1900, it was greeted not just by politicians and military, but by large crowds of people. It was a new century. Argentina was a rising power in the world, richer than its old colonial master. A new relationship was dawning. So why all the embarrassment when the Argentine national anthem was played? Welcome to episode 2 of this series on national anthems, the worst songs in the world. My name is David Pate. I'm a broadcaster, writer, and journalist in Halifax, Nova Scotia. In this episode, we're going to look at how some of the worst excesses of national anthems can be trimmed back, and how some countries can't seem to let go of their awful theme songs. Argentina adopted its anthem in 1813 in the midst of its war of independence with Spain. That's why there's so much nastiness in it. The fight was fresh and the wounds not yet healed. Back then there was no real limit to how long an anthem could be, so you could pack in all the resentment, bitterness and violence that you liked. In Argentina's case, that runs to 9 verses, which can take about 25 minutes to sing. Most of it is about the Spanish overlords. Don't you see them devouring as wild animals all the people who surrender to them? The anthem shouts. And the Spanish are variously referred to as bloodthirsty tigers, fiery tyrants, vile invaders, and fierce oppressors. So when Argentina sent its new training frigate on a goodwill tour to Spain in 1900, all that invective suddenly seemed a little over the top. The Spanish were too polite to complain, but word got back to Buenos Aires that maybe it was time to dial back the rhetoric. And something surprising happened. Argentina's rulers behaved like adults. A presidential decree was issued. The anthem contains phrases written as a product of another era and have since lost their relevance. Such phrases denigrate the patriotism of the Spanish people and are incompatible with international relations of friendship, union, and harmony that today unite the Argentine nation with Spain. Well, that was nice, wasn't it? The overlong anthem was reworked, and the nasty anti-Spanish stuff was all removed. They couldn't quite go all the way. The stuff about swearing to die with glory if needed was left in, but hey, you have to hand it to them for doing mostly the right thing. I don't want to pick on Spain, but the Spanish did occupy a lot of the world, and the countries that kicked them out definitely wanted to let people know who won. Except not all of Spain's former possessions had to fight for independence. For some of them, it was more a matter of administration than revolution, like Guatemala. So how did it end up with an anthem that talks about fighting, clashes of steel, and torrents of blood? Well, here's how. When Guatemala finally got around to wanting an anthem in the late 19th century, it held a competition. The winning poem, the one with all those strange references to a violent revolution that never happened, was submitted anonymously. It wasn't until a deathbed confession in 1910 that it all made sense. One of the committee members who picked Guatemala's anthem was a Cuban poet, José Joaquín Palma. He admitted to being the anonymous author of the anthem. He didn't know much about Guatemala's independence struggle, but he certainly knew about Cuba's long fight against Spanish rule because he took part in it. So he just assumed his own experience applied to Guatemala's story. Eventually, the lyrics were reworked. The blood, steel, and fighting were dropped in favor of lines about how the road to nationhood was managed without bloody clash. More countries should embrace the idea of toning down their anthems, unless of course they really believe the point of an anthem is to intimidate, threaten, and warn the world. For example, take China. That's the March of the Volunteers, China's anthem since the Communist Party took power in 1949. That came after a long civil war that was complicated by simultaneously fighting a Japanese invasion. It's an oddity amongst anthems because it's actually a movie theme song. Children of Troubled Times was released in 1935. It was made by communist patriots and tells the story of two friends. One joins the resistance to the Japanese, the other is more drawn to a Western lifestyle and a glamorous widow. But when his friend is killed, he realizes where his true loyalties are and marches off to war. The theme song was a big hit among Chinese soldiers. You can see why it was useful as musical propaganda during the war, but you have to think that one of the world's most ancient civilizations could find something more inspiring for an anthem than urging poorly trained volunteers to march towards the enemy's guns. There are lots of examples of bad anthems that rely on horrible imagery, and yet countries seem to be trapped by their terrible pasts, instead of celebrating a brighter future. Like Vietnam, a country that should be sick and tired of war, and certainly shouldn't be glorifying it. The Vietnamese government estimates more than 3 million people died in fighting between 1955 and 1975. and yet its anthem relishes the prospect of battle. The soldiers don't just march to war, they hurry towards it, over the bodies of their foes, while waving a flag red with the blood of victory. Is that truly reflective of how today's Vietnamese see their country? And that sort of violent past being celebrated by nations that claim to be peaceful is all too common. The Republic of Ireland's anthem also celebrates battle. The opening lines are, "Soldiers are we, whose lives are pledged to Ireland." It goes on to say that no more will they shelter the despot or the slave, but will chant a soldier's song while cannons roar and rifles peal. In a way, the Irish people are held hostage by their anthem. It can't be changed while the dream of a united Ireland remains unrealised. And if reunification does happen, the anthem will almost certainly have to be replaced. But Ireland has shown how you can get around the problem of an anthem that doesn't work for everyone. One of the oddities of Ireland is that despite being divided between British and Irish rule, many organisations still operate on an all-Ireland basis. Like rugby, players for the Irish rugby team are drawn from the entire island, which means that some of the players see their nationality as British while they pull on a green rugby jersey. Those players don't know the words to the Irish anthem or want to sing it, and some of the supporters in the stands feel the same way. So the Irish Rugby Football Union commissioned a new anthem. Ireland's Call isn't exactly the most inspiring of songs. Its opening line of "Come the day and come the hour" is, to these Scottish ears anyway, a clear rip-off of Robert Burns' line, "Now's the day and now's the hour." But it's won grudging acceptance as a compromise anthem, and it achieves the goal of giving Irish rugby players and fans a song everyone can at least agree to sing. And really, isn't that the point of an anthem? If you're going to have one, then best to have an indifferent song everyone can get behind than a passionate one with a terrible message. Ireland's Call isn't likely to become the anthem of a possible united Ireland, but who knows? At least it isn't calling on people to massacre their enemies. Words in an anthem are obviously important, particularly when they're all about blood, violence, and death. But sometimes it's not the words that are the problem. It's the context. The lyrics of Japan's national anthem are more than 800 years old. Kimigayo seems like a thoroughly inoffensive tribute to the emperor. It's also very short. May your reign continue for 1,000, 8,000 generations, until the tiny pebbles grow into massive boulders, lush with moss. So what could possibly be the problem with that? Well, as I said, it's all in the context. In the eyes of some, Kimigayo is inextricably linked to the imperial regime that presided over terrible war crimes across Asia. After the Second World War, many Japanese teachers recognized the role they had played in getting children to show complete obedience to the emperor and in creating a generation of fanatical soldiers. The teachers said, "Never again," and refused to play the anthem or raise the flag in schools. But nationalist politicians pushed back, with laws requiring the anthem to be sung, and courts confirmed teachers could be disciplined and even lose their jobs for sitting in silence. That uneasy relationship between Japan's teachers and the country's anthem continues today. Other countries have taken different approaches with their anthems, seeking reconciliation where triumphalism would have been easier and even understandable, and rejecting the temptation to glorify the march to war in favor of peace. One of the miracles of nation building in the late 20th century happened in South Africa. Nelson Mandela led the country through a peaceful transition of power from the apartheid state to democracy, all by urging reconciliation.
We enter into a covenant that we shall build a society in which all South Africans, both black and white, will be able to walk tall without any fear in their hearts, assured of their inalienable right to human dignity. A rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world.
New national symbols were needed for South Africa, a new rainbow flag and a new anthem. But Mandela knew he had to include the still powerful white minority in these symbols. So when it came to creating a new anthem, he instructed its creators to incorporate part of the old apartheid era's song. The new anthem features 5 languages and a sudden musical gear change in the middle when it switches to the hymn-like melody of the Afrikaner anthem Die Stem. As with all compromises, not everyone is happy, particularly over the inclusion of the Afrikaner section,
but others understand what Mandela wanted.
In the spirit of what we stand for as a nation post-1994, the spirit of reconciliation.
I'm happy with all the multi-languages, the rainbow nation. I'm happy with it. We are a rainbow nation. I think we should honor that and stay with them. We must just find a way of living together.
And there's nothing about fighting in South Africa's song, although there is a lot about God, but that's a story for another episode. South Africa isn't alone in trying to soothe a troubled nation with gentle lyrics. One of the greatest atrocities in the long list of 20th century horrors took place in Cambodia. The communist Khmer Rouge seized power in 1975. The cities were emptied as people were forced out at gunpoint to work on the land. Anyone named an enemy of the state was slaughtered in what came to be known as the killing fields. In less than 4 years, an estimated 2 million people, quarter of the population, were dead. The murderous regime was toppled in 1979 when the Vietnamese invaded and occupied the country. It took years of talks before Cambodians got a new government under a restored monarchy and a restored anthem. The reintroduced anthem is a traditional God Save the Queen type of song. It's a gentle piece, slow and reflective, recalling temples asleep in the forest. No dying, no marching, no blood, no talk of revenge. There's a lesson we can all learn from South Africa and Cambodia and from the other countries featured in this episode. Do we want our children to learn to fight or to live in peace? Because, as Japan's teachers figured out, anthems can be used to send a dangerous message.